It was just another rainy afternoon in Portland when a millionaire CEO walked into an elementary school cafeteria. He expected a quick visit, a handshake, and a photo op. But instead, his eyes fell on a little girl sitting alone at the far corner. Her shoes were torn, her socks soaked through, and laughter from other children echoed like knives in the room. In that fragile moment, something inside him broke open. Because he remembered, he had once been that child with shoes held together by tape, trying to disappear at the lunch table. What happened next was not about wealth, or power, or charity. It was about dignity, compassion, and the simple act of sitting beside someone who feels invisible. Stay with us as we share how this one encounter would change 2 lives forever. And if you believe in stories of hope and healing, subscribe now to Hidden Echo Stories. The rain came down in a steady drizzle, blurring the outlines of the city and coating every street in Portland with a damp grayness. Inside the black SUV that pulled up in front of Lincoln Elementary, Lucas Grant tapped his fingers against the steering wheel. He was not thinking about the weather. He was thinking about time, about numbers, about how quickly he could finish this visit and get back to the work that made sense to him. His assistant's voice buzzed in his earpiece, reminding him that it was only a cafeteria inspection and a glance at the new playground equipment. 15 minutes, no cameras, no speeches. That was all. At 42, Lucas was a man who had trained himself to live in controlled intervals of minutes and schedules, a face of a booming company that had little patience for wasted moments. He followed the principal through the corridors, the walls covered in children's artwork and handprints that seemed to cling to the air with a kind of messy joy. He nodded politely, eyes moving forward, already thinking about his next meeting. Yet as they turned into the cafeteria, the sound of children's laughter and the clatter of trays broke through his focus. For a moment he paused, scanning the room. Dozens of children crowded the tables, their voices overlapping like a tide. He almost looked away. Almost. But then he saw her. She sat alone in the farthest corner, her body small against the large round table. Her dress was thin, her jacket too big, as if it had been handed down through many children before her. Blonde braids clung damply to her cheeks, but it was not her hair or her jacket that held him frozen. It was her shoes, or rather, what remained of them. Pink sneakers, faded and split open at the toes, exposing soaked socks that clung to her skin. Every movement seemed painful. Her heels rubbed raw, and yet she angled her feet inward, as if she could hide them from the world. On the table before her sat a small container with nothing more than a folded slice of bread and a half-empty bottle of water. Lucas stopped mid-step. The principal's voice became distant, a blur against the sharp echo that slammed into his memory. He was no longer a wealthy man in a tailored coat. He was a boy again, sitting in a cafeteria, duct tape wrapped around his own shoes, hearing the laughter of classmates who saw everything. He remembered the sting of humiliation, the ache of pretending not to care. He remembered the way shame settled deep into his chest like a weight that would never lift. And standing there, decades later, with his name printed in magazines and his shoes worth more than his mother once earned in a month, he felt the same ache coil inside him. A group of boys at a nearby table snickered, pointing at the little girl. Their words cut through the noise. "Look at her shoes. My dog are better." Another boy smirked, and the laughter spread. Lucas's jaw tightened. He barely breathed. Something in him shifted, not a decision but an instinct, as if the years between his childhood and this moment collapsed into nothing. Without thinking, he began to walk toward her. The cafeteria grew quieter with each step. Teachers watched, confused, as the millionaire visitor crossed the room. Children stilled, forks frozen in midair. Even the boys who had been laughing fell silent. Lucas reached the small table where the girl sat, her shoulders hunched, peeling crust from her bread as though it could shield her. She had not looked up yet. He set his tray down gently beside her, lowering himself so his eyes were level with hers. She flinched at the movement, glancing sideways, startled. Her eyes were blue, wide and uncertain, the kind of eyes that belonged to a child who had learned too early how to shrink into the background. Lucas gave her a soft smile, not pity, not performance, just presence. "Hi," he said quietly. "Mind if I sit here?" She hesitated, glancing at the boys across the room, then back at him. After a long pause, she shook her head almost imperceptibly. "I do not mind," she whispered. He sat, leaving enough space so she did not feel crowded but close enough that she would not feel alone. For a moment, the two of them existed in a bubble of silence, while the room hummed with whispers they both ignored. The little girl finally looked at him again, tilting her head. "Are you the man from the picture?" she asked. Lucas followed her gaze to the banner taped above the cafeteria door where his photo smiled stiffly at a ribbon-cutting ceremony. He chuckled softly. "Guilty." She nodded solemnly, then returned to her bread as if that settled everything. Lucas did not push further. He picked up his fork and poked at the pasta on his tray. For the first time in years, he did not care about the stares of others. He cared only that this small girl, with her broken shoes and quiet courage, was not eating alone anymore. When he finally asked her name, her lips curved just barely. "Maya," she said, and that single word lodged itself inside him, not as a fleeting encounter but as something permanent. Lucas, a man who had not allowed himself to cry in 20 years, felt a sharp sting behind his eyes. He did not know it yet, but his life had already begun to change. The rain had eased by the time lunch ended, but Lucas remained seated at the table, unwilling to break the fragile stillness that had formed between them. Maya finished her bread in small bites, sipping the last of her water. He wanted to tell her everything, that he knew what it was like to carry shame in silence, that he knew the cold sting of being invisible. Instead, he simply offered a quiet story of his own childhood, about the time he had mistakenly brought a can of dog food to school instead of chili. Her small giggle, barely more than a breath, rippled through him like sunlight breaking cloud cover. It was the sound of a child momentarily forgetting to guard her heart. As the cafeteria emptied, he stood and offered to walk her out. She refused politely. Repeating words her mother had clearly taught her, "She says not to bother people." The sincerity in her tone pierced him. He watched her small figure disappear down the path, shoes soaking once again in the puddles. And he understood. This was not about pity or obligation. It was about something deeper, something he had long buried but now recognized in her fragile steps. A reminder of who he once was and a promise of who he still could be. The morning after his visit to the school, the rain had not stopped. If anything, it had grown heavier, streaking the windows of Lucas Grant's penthouse in long silver lines. He stood in the kitchen, a cup of coffee growing cold on the counter, his eyes fixed on the file his assistant had delivered overnight. Inside were the details of a life lived quietly in survival mode. Maya Harper, age 5. Guardian, Rachel Harper. A single mother working 2 jobs, one in a diner and one stocking shelves, her income stretched thin and her health already compromised by a fractured leg that had healed poorly. Rent overdue. No family listed. Lucas closed the file slowly, his jaw tight. It was not a temporary misstep. It was a pattern of struggle stitched together with threadbare determination. By noon he was on the road, alone. No driver, no assistant, just Lucas behind the wheel of a sedan that no one would recognize. He wore an old baseball cap pulled low, his face nearly hidden. The address led him to a neighborhood he had not seen in years, a place where cracked sidewalks and leaning mailboxes told the story of lives lived on the edge. He parked across from a tired brick apartment building, its paint peeling, its roof sagging. On the concrete steps sat Maya, her backpack hugged to her chest, her socks slipping down around her ankles. She was sketching in a notebook with a pencil worn down to a stub, her small face tilted in concentration. The sight struck him harder than he expected. Moments later, a bus rumbled to a stop, releasing a handful of passengers. Among them was Rachel Harper. She limped slightly, favoring her right leg, her diner uniform marked faintly with stains. A takeout bag dangled from her arm, a bottle of painkillers peeking from her pocket. Lucas watched as Maya jumped up immediately, her whole body quick to match her mother's weary pace. Rachel ruffled her daughter's hair with a faint smile, a gesture small but full of love. It was practiced, efficient. the kind of affection shaped by exhaustion yet unwavering in its intent. When Rachel noticed Lucas, her body tensed instantly. She stepped in front of her daughter, shoulders squared, protective. Her eyes narrowed with the wariness of someone who had learned long ago not to trust easily. Lucas lifted his hand in greeting, his voice calm. He told her he had shared lunch with Maya the day before, that her daughter had been kind, that he hoped it was all right. Rachel studied him, her jaw tight, her gaze flicking between him and Maya. At last she allowed him to walk with them to their apartment. Inside, the stairwell smelled of mildew and old cooking. Their unit was small but clean, the furniture worn yet cared for, pride evident in the neatness. Rachel stood in the doorway, her stance firm. "We are fine," she said evenly. It was not anger, it was defense. Lucas nodded, not pushing further. But the image of their world stayed with him. That night in his high-rise apartment, he stared out over the glittering city and made a decision. He would help them. But it would never be with strings attached, never with his name stamped on it like charity. It would be invisible, anonymous, the kind of help that preserved dignity rather than stripped it away. 2 days later, he quietly arranged for Rachel's rent to be covered through an anonymous trust. No signatures, no trace back to him. Next, he made a call to a children's charity, requesting a pair of high-quality sneakers Maya's size to be delivered to her school. The tag would read only, "For all the places you will run to next." Nothing more. The following morning, Lucas sat in his car across from Lincoln Elementary, his breath caught in his chest as he watched through the rain. A courier delivered a small package to the office. An hour later, he saw Maya walking down the hallway, clutching a shoebox to her chest like treasure. She opened it at her desk, her eyes wide as she pulled out lavender sneakers that shimmered with promise. She slipped them on slowly, reverently, as if afraid they might disappear. And for the first time, the whispers of her classmates carried not cruelty but awe. At recess, she ran across the blacktop with arms stretched wide, her laughter bright against the gray sky. Lucas remained in his car unseen, yet in that moment he felt something shift inside him. It was not triumph. It was peace, a stillness he had not known for years. When he returned to the school under the pretense of checking playground renovations, a teacher pulled him aside. She warned him that Rachel was fiercely proud, that she would resist help if she thought it came from pity. "Dignity," the teacher said, "is sometimes the only thing people have left when everything else is taken." Lucas absorbed the words, realizing they explained everything he had sensed in Rachel's eyes. That evening, in the quiet of his apartment, he unfolded a child's drawing that had been slipped to him by the school secretary. 3 stick figures, one tall, 2 small. The tallest wore a blue suit and held the hand of the girl in pink shoes. At the bottom, scrawled in purple crayon, were the words, "Thank you. I feel fast now." Lucas folded it carefully, pressing the paper to his chest for a long moment before slipping it into his jacket pocket. He whispered softly, though no one could hear, "You are welcome, kid." The weeks that followed became a rhythm. Lucas found reasons to appear at the school, always under the guise of business, but always with his eyes quietly searching for Maya. He never approached her in public, never made her feel singled out. He was content to watch her run, to see her sit in the library sketching flowers with a new set of pencils he had arranged for the class to receive. Every small piece of her joy was a quiet victory he carried back to his office like a secret. It was not only Maya who was changing. It was Lucas himself. His schedule began to bend around these visits. Meetings shifted, priorities tilted, and the sharpness that once defined his world softened. The laughter of children replaced the endless hum of boardroom voices. For the first time in decades, he felt like he was not just moving numbers on a page, but mending something broken, not only in others but within himself. The weeks turned into months, and the quiet rhythm that had begun between Lucas, Maya, and Rachel deepened, in ways none of them could have predicted. Lucas continued to visit the school under practical pretenses, walking the playground, talking with the principal, and occasionally stepping into classrooms where he could linger near the back without drawing attention. What he sought was not recognition, but a simple glimpse of Maya's world. Each time he saw her smile without hesitation, each time he noticed her shoelaces tied neatly and her small shoulders lifted a little higher, he felt a sense of balance returning to his own life. It became impossible to deny that Maya was no longer just a child he had chosen to help. She was becoming a thread woven into the very fabric of his days. He found himself rearranging meetings so he could stop by the school, making excuses to his board when he turned down travel that once would have seemed unavoidable. It was not duty pulling him back, but something far quieter and stronger, a need to stay close to a story that reminded him what humanity meant. One afternoon, as the art class wrapped up, Lucas arrived just as children were filing out with colorful papers in hand. Maya lagged behind, her head bent low over her drawing, her tongue pressed against the corner of her lips in concentration. When she finally tucked the paper into her backpack and looked up, she spotted him at the door. Her eyes lit up in that quiet way of hers, not bursting with excitement, but with the kind of trust that grows slowly, carefully. She walked over, hugging her backpack, and whispered hello. He crouched to her level, asking what she had drawn. Hesitant at first, she pulled out the picture. A watercolor of a small house with a bright red roof, a garden blooming with flowers, and 3 figures standing close together. Lucas noticed the sidewalk in the painting, smooth and unbroken. When he asked about it, Maya replied with words that burrowed into him. "Mom says sometimes grown-ups fall through the cracks." He stared at the picture, his chest tightening. Then she pointed to the figures and explained with simple certainty. "That is me. That is Mom. That is you." The weight of that sentence pressed into Lucas with a force stronger than any boardroom challenge. He had never been drawn in a child's picture before, never been included in someone else's vision of home. For Maya, it was not an abstract dream. It was a reality she already claimed. The changes in Rachel were subtler but just as profound. She carried herself differently, her steps no longer slowed by despair alone. When Lucas saw her at the diner on a quiet afternoon, he noticed the lines of exhaustion etched into her face, but he also noticed the flicker of fire that had returned to her eyes. Their conversation was guarded, cautious at first. Rachel had lived long enough to know that help often carried hidden costs. She accused him of hovering around her daughter, of giving without reason. Lucas did not deny it. He told her, with a voice low and steady, that he knew what it was like to be a child hiding broken shoes and trying to disappear. He told her that he had been that child once. The truth landed heavily between them. Rachel's suspicion wavered, replaced by something softer, though not entirely trust. That evening, Maya burst into the diner with a flyer for an art contest, her voice brimming with excitement. When Rachel told her they could not afford the registration fee, Maya simply nodded, her joy fading. Lucas said nothing in that moment, but later he ensured the fee was paid anonymously, along with donations to cover other children as well. When Maya's painting won second place, her eyes searched the crowd until she found him standing quietly in the back, offering the smallest thumbs up. Her smile in that instant was not about winning. It was about being seen. After the ceremony, Rachel confronted him again, this time not with sharpness but with something close to bewilderment. She asked why he was doing this for them. His answer was simple, because no one had done it for him when he needed it most. For the first time, her expression softened into something that looked like understanding. In the weeks that followed, Rachel applied for a new position through a community program Lucas had arranged but never put his name on. The flexible hours and steady pay gave her a chance to breathe, to spend evenings with Maya instead of rushing between jobs. Their apartment did not magically transform, but the air inside it changed. It felt lighter, fuller. There were dinners eaten together, drawings taped to the refrigerator, laughter that lingered after bedtime. Lucas, though he kept his distance from their private space, became part of the rhythm in ways that needed no label. One Thursday evening, after sharing a simple meal near the school, the 3 of them walked home together. Maya held Lucas's hand, swinging it with the kind of carefree rhythm only a child can manage. Rachel walked beside them, her cheeks flushed from the cool air, her laughter easier than he had ever heard it. At the steps of the apartment, Maya turned and asked a question too heavy for her small voice. "Do you think this will last?" Lucas crouched down so their eyes met, and he answered with a quiet promise. "I am not going anywhere." Rachel heard the words, and though she said nothing, her gaze lingered on him with a silent acknowledgement that the lines between charity, friendship, and something deeper had long since blurred. The seasons shifted. Spring arrived, bringing softer skis and blooming petals on the sidewalks outside the school. One weekend, at Maya's insistence, they shared a picnic beneath the old oak tree at the edge of the playground. She unpacked peanut butter sandwiches and strawberries with the pride of a hostess. Rachel poured lemonade from a thermos, her posture relaxed in a way that would have surprised her former self. Lucas watched the two of them, marveling at how peace had taken root where exhaustion once reigned. Then Maya handed him a gift wrapped in bright blue paper. Inside was a shadow box frame holding her old torn sneakers. A note in her careful handwriting read, "So you do not forget how far we came." Lucas's throat tightened as he touched the worn fabric. It was not just a gift. It was a declaration, a reminder of a journey shared. She followed it with another drawing, simpler but just as powerful. 3 figures standing in a garden, the sun beaming above, and beneath it the words, "My safe place." Lucas pulled Maya into his arms, holding her tightly, no longer afraid of showing what the moment meant. Rachel's eyes shimmered as she watched, her hand reaching for his. Her voice was soft but steady when she said, "You did not just give us help, you gave us back our dignity." Lucas shook his head gently. "You never lost it. You only needed someone to remind you it was still there." As the sun dipped behind the rooftops, the 3 of them packed up their picnic. Maya skipped ahead, humming, her lavender shoes bright against the sidewalk. Rachel and Lucas walked side by side, the silence between them warm and certain. At the gate of the school, Maya turned and called out, "Come on, we are a team now." Lucas laughed, reaching for Rachel's hand, and for the first time in a very long time he felt whole. The story of Lucas, Rachel, and Maya is not just about wealth meeting poverty, or a powerful man rescuing a struggling family. It is about something far deeper, something universal. It is about dignity, about the invisible scars carried from childhood, and about the way compassion can quietly stitch broken pieces back together. Lucas had spent years building an empire, chasing achievements that sparkled on magazine covers but left him hollow inside. Yet it was not another contract, not another award that changed him. It was the sight of a small girl with torn shoes, a reflection of the boy he once had been, sitting alone in a cafeteria. From that moment, everything shifted. Each step he took toward Maya was a step back into his own forgotten wounds, and each act of kindness he offered was a way of healing both her life and his own. He did not arrive with grand speeches or flashy gestures. Instead, he came with presence, with listening, with the humility to sit beside a child who felt invisible. What grew from that simple act was not charity but connection, not obligation but family. Rachel, who had lived her life shielding her daughter with quiet strength, learned that not every helping hand comes with a hidden price. She discovered that dignity could be preserved, even strengthened, when compassion is given with respect. Maya, who had carried more weight in her 5 years than many carry in a lifetime, found not only new shoes but a safe place to grow, to laugh, to dream. And Lucas, who once believed that numbers mattered more than people, discovered that true success is measured not in profit but in presence, not in luxury but in love. In the end, it was not just Maya who walked in new shoes. They all did. Rachel stepped into stability, no longer defined by exhaustion. Maya stepped into joy, her drawings filled with gardens and homes where cracks no longer existed. And Lucas stepped into a life where he was no longer running from the boy with duct-taped shoes, but finally walking beside him with peace. This story reminds us that healing often begins in the smallest of moments. A quiet smile across a cafeteria table, a whispered promise to stay, a pair of worn-out sneakers turned into a treasure. And it asks us a question we cannot ignore. When we see someone sitting alone, hurting in ways the world does not notice. Will we look away, or will we sit down beside them? If this journey has touched your heart, if you believe in stories that honor dignity and celebrate hope, we invite you to become part of our community. Subscribe to Hidden Echo Stories, where voices that are often overlooked are given space to be heard, and where each story carries the power to heal, inspire, and remind us that none of us are truly alone. Stay with us for more tales that echo long after the screen goes dark, and let us walk this path of compassion together.